Watch out, guys, I've got a script for this one. I just have to find it. Alright. Hope. We must have hope. And yet, hope is the mother of fools. When Pandora opened her box and all that curses our lives fled into the world, only one thing remained at the bottom: hope. By the way, I know Pandora's box is Pandora's Pythos. Thank you very much, wise guy. Greek mythology was mandatory reading in my primary school, so I've known this myth for a long time. And I was uncertain about the meaning of this even then. I think that the way you initially understand this part of the myth tells more about you than about it. So let me know in the comments how you understood it when you first was faced with it. It is perhaps fitting that it's the box itself that prevailed in the proverb, because how would you even phrase a proverb about that hope? Hope is left at the bottom. That immediately can be interpreted in two ways. Hope is left in the end. That's more fitting, but it suggests one interpretation over another. I didn't tell you what those interpretations are, and I won't. I trust that you are capable of seeing them yourself. And I fear that any divagations on the nature of this myth and hope within it would leave me with unsatisfactory answer. It means what you think it means. However, this ambivalence towards hope prevails to this day, as in those two examples I stated in the beginning. Hope is necessary, but hope is foolish. It would be simple for me to divide hope in two. Take ancient Greek principle found, for instance, in Plato's Symposium, beginning of which is a conversation on passivity and activity roles, or if you are unfamiliar, whether Achilles was a top or bottom, because fundaments of Western civilization are gay as fuck. I could simply take that principle and apply it to hope. Passive hope is foolish, awaiting, while active hope is necessary, a driving force. But I'm not satisfied with that either. It's too common of a narrative. It would be like saying, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. That's real hope. But I don't think hope either deserves or subjects itself to division. I think hope must stay as one, both foolish and necessary, both the princess and a knight in the shining armor. Hope doesn't need to be taught, it's natural. It allows us to survive hardships when with passivity, awaiting better days, and it propels us to action, making us believe that our dreams are in our reach. We contain multitudes. So why wouldn't hope do the same? I think that our need to understand and simplify can instead flatten. That answer still does not satisfy me. Even though it seems to be pointing in the right direction, it might sound more profound. But it doesn't tell us much. So, let's take a closer look at hope. It is an inborn characteristic of humans that works against the odds, against hardships. It multiplies the less options a person has, and the worse their position, the greater the hope. This knowledge is derived directly from experience and self-stating. Thus, I'll call it oppositional. Hope in this sense does not act to change. It does not reach for the better. It allows to function in dire situation, especially prolonged ones, as it doesn't appear in short bursts. Thus, I'll call it lingering. It is quite impossible for outside actions to destroy it. I don't know what I meant when I wrote this. Probably I misspelled something. As it lays to say at the bottom of pathos, and it does not bother with disappearing options. I am dyslexic. As it is always shifting and isn't bound to one tangible goal. Thus I'll call it vague. It is finally unconcerned with reality and seems to be bound to imagination, as imagination works in its favor to bring relief or visions of better life without a need to produce a path towards it. Thus I'll call it fantastic. As it is oppositional or reactive, it would surely fall into passive category. And here, my divagations should end. However, it poses one more characteristic that is not at work in its natural state or dormant state, but can be brought out, and that is the fact that it is transformatory. When it is not needed, it dissipates, thus being fluctuating, but it is not the aforementioned transformation. It happens in the other direction, when it gathers to a breaking point, which can happen when a person is not satisfied with hope. It can be released, as when a person says that they have no more hope, which always seems to be a grand statement. As it is quite potent, its release can be twofold. If it is discarded, it leaves empty space, as is seen in depressive moods. When it is transformed, it changes the passive energy to an active one, becoming drive or will, and fueling need to change that it has itself facilitated. I still believe that it is passive force. However, it plants a seed of action within people, with visions and nomen omen, hopes of betterment, of possibilities that we can yearn for. Thus, it is a precursor to will. I further believe those two presented options. I wrote that myself. One negative, the other positive, contain within themselves their opposites. Losing hope to emptiness and lack of it can make space for acceptance instead of depression. Transformation of hope into will, when forced, as in famous death ground situation from Art of War, is an example of gaining will to power through hopelessness and lack of any options. It is destructive rather than constructive, but using the word negative in colloquial sense doesn't fit it perfectly. Perhaps the best representation of such situation from history that is still in memory would be liquidation of Warsaw Ghetto by Germans, which led to an uprising, as Jews within ghetto were certain they would die either way. Similar to people of Gaza that have nowhere to go, are still further and further pushed into the death ground. Coming back to simpler words, it might just be the case that this duality of possible meaning in Pandora's myths, or rather duality of possible interpretation of it, speaks to understanding that hope can be transformed or discarded. At last, you might consider that rhetoric unnecessary, and leave the hope and the pit of Pythos where it lay dormant. That too is an option, as hope may remain hope, and remain through all hardships that pass. I don't know, man.